we're allowed to do it at home, but only if you've got a spot in your house which you don't have any dealings
Contact with anyone else.
Yeah, so a number of years ago we converted our garage, because I've got 3 teenage sons and I didn't want them in when they had friends over to be in the house.
So you got to live in the garage for 2 weeks.
I've done it once already. I swear it's
Morning.
It's so ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Morning.
99%
Beautiful day.
I've said this in the media, very publicly.
Yeah.
Critical stakeholders, the Labor or whatever, federal government, is 99%.
Yeah. Well, I'm giving a speech tomorrow night, which will probably be something Australian, but I'm saying, come on, you're actually people who've been harmed by border shut. This is international and state, so I'm not going to go through having a dig specifically at McGowan either.
Yeah. No, he's taken a certain part.
And they're lobbying for it.
Yeah. I know, it's bizarre. Well, it's not bizarre. The problem with it is provision.
When they sold the base, that's what
Which is short term.
Yeah.
And it affects us very
Brian,
often.
how are you? Share a bit of weight, what's going on?
Inconsistencies are growing as well.
Yeah.
Hello?
You just came from Alabama into this one?
Yeah.
Yes, I saw you. I was watching you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the cue.
Good to go? Honourable members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? And I call the member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm going to read out a speech written by Zoe, a young constituent of mine in my electorate, about her vision for Australia in 20 years. She submitted this speech as part of the Raise Your Voice campaign aimed at raising young voices in our federal parliament. Hi, my name is Zoe. I'm 9 years old. In 20 years, for the world, I would like there to be no more COVID-19, a solution for global warming and a home for everyone. For me and others with type 1 diabetes, I would like to see a cure. Diabetes is a very hard thing to deal with. It's not like a cold or the flu. It never, ever goes away. All day and night, I must monitor my blood sugar, and every time I eat, I have to decide how much insulin to give. Sometimes I feel very tired and yucky because I'm low. This can happen anywhere, anytime. I hate having lows at school, at night time and on special occasions. Having diabetes is scary and at times makes me feel lonely and different. My life has been much better with the continuous glucose monitor and insulin pump. I can go to parties, I don't have lots of daily injections, and my blood sugars are better. I'm worried that when I'm older, I won't be able to afford a pump and CGM. So I speak for everyone to say that by 20 years' time, I would like pumps and CGMs to be free for everyone while we work towards a cure. In 20 years, I hope everyone is in their own home, not worrying about COVID-19 or global warming, and for people with type 1 diabetes, there is a cure or free access to the technology they need. I hope I did that justice. Zoe, exclamation mark. Well done, Zoe. So, Deputy Speaker, I also want to acknowledge other constituents of mine and members of my community, local community. The people I represent, like Zoe, are passionate, they're caring, they think of others, and they think of our community and of our nation as a whole as well. My local meetings over the past month show this, even though most of them were on Zoom. I spoke with the Glenroy College students in my electorate, the parents and the teachers, about the importance of them getting vaccinated. I met with some passionate teachers from Brunswick Southwest Primary on how they can help those fleeing from Afghanistan. I spoke with our Australian Lebanese Medical Association and the local community about vaccination in that community and the risk of remaining unvaccinated, as well as the importance of combating disinformation that spreads within the community. I visited the Inner North Medical Clinic's Paradise and Reggae-themed vaccination hub. Sure, look at these pictures. It makes vaccination look very much fun. Pina coladas and pictures of palm trees. And it was a lot of fun for the people getting vaccinated there at the Inner North Medical Clinic. I visited the Nourishing Neighbours in Coburg, a volunteer-run walk and pantry for people.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the member for Barker.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to Jack Hopgood OAM, who passed away this past weekend after over 101 years of inspirational life lived. Jack was a softly spoken, humble man who was never comfortable being the focus of attention, but it would be amiss of me not to honour his life in this place at his time of passing. Jack Richard Hopgood was born in Mount Gambier in 1920. Jack enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force at the age of 19, and on the 1st of April 1940, he was deployed overseas at the age of 20, leaving behind his job at his father's garage and his new bride, Jean. He served in Sumatra and was captured by the Japanese in Java. He was taken to Singapore as a prisoner of war in 1942. He was held by the Japanese for more than 3 years. Upon returning home from war in 1945, Jack returned to his father's garage, eventually taking over the business upon his father's death. He was an exceptional member of the Mount Gambier community and someone I was proud and extremely privileged to even know. Jack was involved in the Mount Gambier Aero Club, the Mount Gambier Veteran and Vintage Car Club, a founding member of the Mount Gambier Chamber of Course, and also served as president of the Mount Gambier RSL. An avid golfer, Jack was instrumental in the establishment of the Blue Lake Golf Club, as well as being largely responsible for the beautification of the lakes area in Mount Gambier. Mr Hopgood was awarded an Order of Australia in 2018 for his decades of service to the Mount Gambier community. Upon receiving this award, the ever-modest Mr Hopgood remarked, "Well, when you've lived as long as me, you would hope that you've achieved something. Otherwise, I suppose you've spent a lot of time in bed." While Jack was modest, many were in awe of not only what he endured, but what he achieved, but most importantly, his attitude to life. Upon returning to Japan in 2017 as a guest of the Japanese government, Jack remarked, "I don't hold any resentment. Hate is a useless emotion." Jack spent an unimaginable 3 years as a prisoner of war and returned to life in Mount Gambier community without resentment, at a time where it was pretty trendy to hate. Instead, he gave back to his community of Mount Gambier, and it's a better place for it. This week, we mourn the loss of a great man, but we celebrate his life of difference that he made to so many. My condolences are extended to his children, Peter, Duncan, Catherine and their families. Vale Jack Hopgood, OAM.
I call the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's my pleasure this morning to present a petition with 5,221 signatures requesting the House call on the Minister for Immigration to use his discretion to end the Murugappan family's misery by granting them permanent residency in Australia. Thank you. Indeed, Deputy Speaker, to allow them to go home to Biloela, their Queensland home. This is a petition created by Dr Patrina Barson, a constituent of my electorate of Cooper and a member of the Centre for a Compassionate Society. Dr Barson, like so many of my constituents and the more than 5,000 people who signed the petition, has been horrified to watch the Morrison government's cruelty when it comes to this family. I know all of us on this side of the chamber share in this horror. Priya and Nades and their girls, Kopika and Tharnika, are beloved members of their community in Biloela. They made a home in that small Queensland community. They had friends and supports. Nades had a job and both he and Priya volunteered, and their 2 daughters were born here in Australia. And when they were taken, whisked out of the community in a dawn raid from Border Force, their friends in their hometown were outraged. In the years since this family was taken from their home, the community of Biloela has not rested in calling for their return. This is a family who has done nothing wrong. They have sought Australia's protection from persecution, and Priya and Nades have told of horrific experiences in Sri Lanka, of a genuine fear that they could face violence or be killed. And there has been nothing but cruelty from this government in response. It started with the Dawn raid back in their home, and it continued at the detention centres where this little family has been cruelly held. It went too far, even for this government, when Tharnika became seriously ill whilst in detention, and they all but refused her proper medical treatment for far too long. Now the family has been released into the community on bridging visas, granted permission to be in Australia for another 12 months. But rather than returning them to their home, to their community in Queensland, they have released them to the community detention in Perth. Why? To keep them from their support networks? To add insult to the torment this government has put them through for the last 4 years? No one truly believes at this stage that there is any genuine reasoning behind the misery the government is inflicting on them. 4 years and $50 million later, there's been no benefit to the community in this family's detention. In fact, the Biloela community has been diminished. All of us in Australia have been diminished because of the cruelty and misery that has been wielded. So I want to thank Dr Barson and everyone who signed the petition, and all of the activists in Biloela and around the country who continue to stand up for this little family. We won't stop fighting for you. Australia won't.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Professor Peter Leedman, AO, Director of the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research, recently briefed me on a visionary proposal to develop a Western Australian comprehensive cancer centre, which will bring together world-class, multidisciplinary cancer care, innovative research and clinical trials for the WA community in one purpose-built, iconic modern facility. It will be a not-for-profit centre that treats all types of cancer, integrating the Perkins translational cancer research and linear clinical trials. Western Australian cancer patients receive excellent clinical care. However, unlike New South Wales and Victoria, there is no single facility dedicated to the treatment of all cancers. This means that cancer patients, including those living in my electorate, typically navigate multiple services to get the treatment they deserve. It is fragmented. An autonomous, comprehensive care centre focused on bench-to-bedside approach is needed, with its own emergency department and intensive care unit. WA is the only mainland Australian state without a current or developing comprehensive cancer centre. The Chris O'Brien Lifehouse in Sydney and the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne are examples of leading centres in Australia. The facility being proposed for Western Australia consists of a 10-storey building occupying 75,000 square metres of gross floor area, costing an estimated $750 million to build, with funding required to be sourced from the WA state government, the federal government and through corporate philanthropy. I wish to formally place on the parliamentary record my strong support for a substantial federal funding contribution to be considered as part of the budget process for a comprehensive cancer centre to be built for the benefit of my fellow Western Australians, including those in my electorate. The benefits of having a comprehensive cancer centre based in Perth include improved patient survival and quality of life through improved access to the latest drugs via clinical trials. Total cancer care will be provided centrally, including diagnosis and treatment, imaging, pathology, surgery, radiotherapy, oncology, hematology, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, exercise and wellness treatments. The facility will also foster world-class translational research that attracts the best clinicians and researchers from across the world. Thank you.
I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak about the challenge facing regional and rural health services and urge the government to inject much-needed funds to to assist in meeting the demands of the COVID-19 pandemic. In my electorate of Indi, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are getting our first taste of the new COVID normal world. After months of lockdowns and border closures, we are opening up in line with the national plan. And as predicted under the plan, we are experiencing cases of COVID-19 in the community, a first for many regional towns in my electorate. Across Indi, regional people have answered the call to get vaccinated. More than 94% of people have had one dose and 74% are fully vaccinated. And now, with outbreaks in our border community, overwhelmingly these people have answered the call to get tested, so much so that the local testing sites in Wodonga were turning people away by 10 a.m. yesterday morning. It's not the first time people in my community have faced waits of hours and hours only to be told to go home. Importantly, this is not a criticism of local health services. They have diligently planned for this situation, working through outbreak scenarios, putting processes in place, working out contingencies and understanding what resources are needed. They are asking people to be patient. The dedicated health workforce is putting in long hours in really uncomfortable, heavy PPE to keep people safe, but they're looking for support and resources that simply aren't coming. The community is doing the right thing, the local health services are doing the right thing, our health workers are doing the right thing, but where is the federal government? When the Deputy Prime Minister was asked what the federal government would do to support regional health services, he said, "Thankfully, we don't own a hospital." Now that is appalling. We've seen hospitals in Melbourne and Sydney at capacity and struggling to care for patients with COVID-19, let alone the normal day running of the hospital. And I don't want that for our regional health services in my electorate or anywhere in regional Australia, where the challenges in finding staff and ageing infrastructure are so long-standing. We know that rural people are 47% more likely to have diabetes, 50% more likely to have cancer and 20% more likely to have kidney disease than our city cousins. Victorians living in regional areas have a 4% lower cancer survival rate than those living in Melbourne. And as a former nurse and midwife, I know regional health services are stretched on a good day. More than 2,500 people have signed an open letter to me calling on the Prime Minister, an open letter to the Prime Minister, I should say, calling for proper investment for the future of regional health, and he needs to answer that call. I'll be meeting him with him after I give this speech today to make sure he reads that letter and hears from regional Australian. The government needs to come to the table and properly fund regional health services to provide surge capacity for testing and to monitor COVID patients in their home. Now is the time to truly invest in regional health.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It will come as no surprise to the members of this place that Grey covers 92.4% of the area of South Australia and is filled with vibrant communities. The BBRF program represents, the regional areas of Australia. We have been great beneficiaries of it over a long period of time, and this latest round is no exception, I'm pleased to report. In the Clare Valley, the Clare Sports Incorporated have secured $2.5 million, which is half of the value of developing a new complex and bringing the Oval up to AFL standard. Now, I want to tell a bit of a story about that. The Clare Oval actually hosts the North Clare Football Club and Netball Club and the South Clare Football and Netball Clubs. And if you know anything about country Australia, and I know you do, Mr Deputy Speaker, you know that the two clubs that sit closest geographically are always the most competitive because they're fighting over players. Well, they've come together on this project and they're going to share the new facility, and I think that's a great tick, and it's the kind of thing that gives me great confidence it will be a huge success. In Cleve, the Cleve Area School has had an agricultural program based on a bequest from Mr Sims some 30 years ago at least, when he left his farm to the school. And they've developed an agricultural program which is actually drawing people in from right across the west and even the mid-north of South Australia, and their boarding house is full. They've also attracted the Motor Traders Association to set up an apprentice training facility there, and so their 10-bed or 10-room boarding facility is totally outclassed. We will now have, as a result of a $2.2 million grant through the BBRF, we'll now have a 35-place boarding facility for the whole region, and that's a wonderful outcome, not just for Cleve but for all of regional South Australia, or certainly in the north and west. In Balaclava, their swimming pool was cracked and irreparably damaged, 50-year-old by an earthquake, they get $1.5 million to build themselves a new pool. In Roxby Downs, a town that often gets overlooked because of its mining wealth and is supported by BHP, very pleased to see $2.7 million going towards the redevelopment of their sporting areas. Marion Bay, which is right down the bottom of Yorke Peninsula, where the toes are, Marion Bay's getting $118,000 for a playground. I met recently with the young women down there, the mothers that backed that program, and they are just delighted to have landed that grant. In Coffin Bay, the yacht club's getting a new floating pontoon jetty, and Coffin Bay is a tourist mecca for South Australia, and I'm sure everyone in this room's tried Coffin Bay oysters at some stage. There's the Port Parham short stay facility, and then 3 $20,000 grants on Port Lincoln, Yorke Peninsula, and up in the upper north at Lake Eyre for development of grants.
I give the call to the member for Whitlam.
This morning, constituents woke up in my electorate to the alarming news that a train had derailed at Kembla Grange. The sight of a 4-car train flipped onto its side is going to be confronting and concerning for the thousands of Illawarra residents who use that same service every week. Thankfully, injuries appear to be minor, with 3 people, including the train driver and 2 passengers, taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. We send them our best wishes for a speedy recovery. I want to put on the record my thanks to the officers from the Lake Illawarra Police Command, who were quickly on hand to assess the situation. They've now established a crime scene and have my full confidence in getting to the bottom of what has occurred and how lives were put at risk. A shout out also to the New South Wales ambulance personnel who worked quickly to free the 39-year-old train driver who was trapped in the wreckage for some period of time, a harrowing experience for him. I offer particular thanks to the ambulance inspector, Mr Norm Rees, who was on the scene to direct operations in getting the injured to hospital, as well as the medical staff who looked after them. Given that the derailment happened at 4 a.m. this morning, we can only shudder to think what would have happened if this incident had occurred just an hour or 2 later, when the trains are packed. Indeed, while we can be thankful that the loss of life and serious injury have been avoided in this instance, this is a wake-up call. Our community is growing quickly as more and more of our fellow Australians locate to this area to take up the wonderful lifestyle and economic opportunities that it has to offer. Unfortunately, the pace of infrastructure growth has not kept up with population growth. I know this area well, West Dapto. The place where this incident occurred, just a few years ago, these were cow paddocks. These were cow paddocks. And the roads and the infrastructure that service these communities are fit for cow paddocks, but not for a growing urban area. I'm not going to preempt what the police investigation will find, but it is clear that the cause of the derailment is a collision with a transit van parked in the area. Thankfully, no one was inside it. It's not too early to observe that clearly there is a need to provide better infrastructure in this area. We need to improve the roads and the rail crossings. There are 3-level rail crossings servicing the roads into the West Dapto area. They are not fit for purpose. We cannot just plonk suburbs in the middle of cow paddocks and think that these incidents will not occur. This is a wake-up call. We must listen to it. Better roads, better schools, safer crossings.
Give the call to the member for Goldstein.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Youth Voice in Parliament program asked, what do you want Australia to look like in 20 years? And many young Goldstein residents answered to the call. All contributions were excellent, but 2 speeches stood out. The first is by 14-year-old Ava Manifsky, and it shares my commitment to national ambition. She wrote, most recently, Australian states and territories have been faced with immense disruption caused by a global pandemic. These events have had a profound impact on all Australians. They have challenged the decision-making and debate of our government and tested our nation's strength and resolve. Winston Churchill once said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. As we look towards our future, we must keep this idea in mind. Today, through the foundations of our democracy,
we continue to address social and economic inequities. If this global pandemic has shown us anything, it has exemplified what we can achieve should we work together for the greater good of our Commonwealth. I can't imagine the challenges Australia will face 20 years from now, but my hope is that the strength of our democracy sustains with visionary leaders who reflect on past choices and decisions that have succeeded and failed, in order to steer this great nation with its diverse people to be stronger, braver and smarter. 20 years from now, I hope to see all Australians embarking on endeavours that are bold enough to benefit generations to come. Congratulations, Ava. The second is by 21-year-old Chris Webster and delves into the importance of freedom, saying, in 20 years, Australia will be the free country it once was. The COVID-19 pandemic has been tough on every person and every facet of life. Unfortunately, the collateral of this pandemic has been our civil liberties. It has highlighted the flaws in our state system, which has cost and will keep costing billions of dollars. In 20 years, we should be able to go about our lives without arbitrary laws dictating our every move. I believe over the past 2 decades, and especially since 2020, Australia and Victoria in particular have become more and more of a nanny state. Regardless of the pandemic, there are too many laws which impinge on our very freedom, from local government all the way up to the federal government. In 20 years, Australia should go back to the free place it once was, without fear of being cancelled or hated on for not being 100% politically correct. In 20 years, Australia should be a free market with a thriving economy that it once was. That's what I want for Australia to be like in 20 years' time. An outstanding contribution, Chris. But also thank you to the other entrants: Jensen Galvin, Nicholas Alexopoulos, Cassie Barker, Christina Cushion, Shari Holden, Anya Hurt, Lily Mayer, Rand Rahman, Isla Rood, Sophia Smith, Martha Stamopoulos and Thomas Stamp. All were outstanding contributions, and I'm sorry we didn't have the chance to read all of them into the Hansard Speaker, but hopefully your name in recognition honours your contribution, and of course we encourage other participants to contribute to this great project and define the future of our country to come.
I give the call to the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. A lion's share of the consequences of the latest Sydney lockdown lies squarely at the feet of Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who had 2 jobs this year: quickly get and roll out vaccines and set up national quarantine, failed at both. His failures saw the virus spread through eastern Sydney and eventually make its way out west. The lack of access to vaccines led to 7,000 people that I represent catching COVID. And throughout this lockdown, we saw the tale of 2 cities: the eastern suburbs of Sydney that had one set of restrictions, and then the west with a completely different set. Police enforced curfews, helicopters over homes, 5-kilometre travel restrictions and movement caps. And throughout the lockdown, the area I represent needed a federal and state government on their side doing the right thing to help them. My office was getting regular calls from local residents who, despite being eligible for a COVID vaccine, unable to get one because GPs had no vaccines or didn't have enough, and we had no mass vax hubs. People wanted to get vaccinated, which made it so infuriating to hear governments blame low vax rates in our area on hesitancy. Not true. In July, we wrote to the New South Wales government offering communities facilities for vax hubs. That fell on deaf ears. We wrote to the feds asking for assistance from the ADF to help set up and run vax hubs to help with the vaccine rollout. Fell on deaf ears. The Health Minister said, remarkably, in our nation's parliament, we didn't need them because GPs and pharmacists were there. Now, the reality was, and bear this in mind, pharmacists were trained in February to administer this vaccine and they did not get their supply until August. That is the truth. And the time at which the vaccination rates, which have been celebrated, the vaccination rates in Western Sydney that were celebrated widely, they skyrocketed from August. It was clear proof that lack of supply, not hesitancy, led to this. And 60% of the deaths in Western and southwestern Sydney were experienced in our area and as a result of people catching COVID. And it shouldn't have happened, and people knew we could have avoided it and they didn't do it. And it really irks me to hear how the federal government celebrates these huge vax rates when they were so sluggish and so inept and unable to get the vaccines and do their job and supply them to people in need, particularly in the vulnerable communities that I represent. And it shouldn't have been that way. But while this has tested our community, I also want to recognise it brought us closer together. And I want to put on the record the heartfelt gratitude of our community to the GPs, the pharmacists, the nurses, the pathologists, all the allied health staff that did an incredible job in administering that vaccine under trying circumstances. They saved lives and we are eternally grateful.
I call the member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Bob and Judith Little, who for over 40 years have owned and run the Spar supermarket in Maclean and are now retiring. The business has won numerous local and national awards for their store and customer service. In 2015, they won the Eastern Region Store of the Year, the Grocery Department of the Year and the Produce Department of the Year. In 2017, they won the Excellence in Retail category at the Northern Rivers Regional Business Awards. In 2018, they won the Grocery Excellence Award again, the Community and Customer Service Excellence Award and the Store Investment Award. The 3 years before that, they also won the Spar Store of the Year consecutively. In 2019, they won the Spiro Notaris Lifetime Achievement Award at the Clarence Valley Business Excellence Awards. They are also wonderful, community-spirited people who this year I was with them when they were giving life membership of the Maclean show. So not only great business people, wonderful community people are Bob and Judith. Bob and Judith love Maclean and Maclean loved them. I wish them every enjoyment in retirement, but something tells me I think they'll both still be very busy. Deputy Speaker, it's been wonderful to watch our Olympians a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, at the Tokyo Olympics. And it reminded me that my home, is home to some of Australia's best athletes, including Athol McQueen, our very own international boxing champion from Kyogle. Athol had 86 fights, he won 70 and lost 16. Of the 16 losses, 4 of them were international or world championship bouts. He competed in the men's heavyweight event at the 1964 Summer Olympics in Japan. He defeated Takeuchi Miuruma of Japan before losing to Joe Frazier of the United States in the quarter-final. Athol was famously the first person to knock heavyweight champion Joe Frazier to the canvas. He personally knew greats from this period like Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, just to name a few. After his career, Athol had his own road construction business, a cream run from the local dairy farm, and later worked for the National Parks and Wildlife. In 2009, he was inducted into the Queensland Boxing Hall of Fame. For many years, he remained involved in boxing in the local scene as a judge and referee. Married to Gloria, they have 6 children between them. Athol, you are a champion. You are in many ways. You're a champion boxer, you're a champion for our community, and I thank you. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to recognise Mark Wilson, who yesterday was acknowledged as the 2021 Northern Rivers Volunteer of the Year Award. Mark was awarded the Volunteer of the Year for 30 years and countless hours of managing the Friends of the Koala Nursery. He's been involved in the organisation since the beginning and has also been involved in organisations such as Ignella Bar Walling Lion Clubs, as is his partner Wendy. Mark, congratulations on your very well-earned award.
If there is no objection, constituency statements will continue for a further 30 minutes. And I call the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak about the Raise Our Voice Australia project, where young people from all around the country, people under 21, have sent a 90-second speech for their local MP to read in the Parliament. And we've had over 40 members of the House of Representatives participate in this and heard some fantastic speeches from young people. I want to commend everyone that sent me a speech. It was really hard to make a decision, with some just really brilliant, thoughtful and thought-provoking submissions from young people in my electorate, and many of which I'd like to draw attention to in social media over the coming weeks. But the speech that I've chosen is by Nick Barker in my electorate, and he's written about youth homelessness. And this is his speech. My name is Nick. I'm 18 from the Canberra electorate, and I am a former homeless youth. In 20 years, I hope that not one Australian youth has to wonder, where will I sleep tonight? Unfortunately, too many youth right now are thinking that exact question, and it is also something I had to ask for over a year. No one should ever have to ask something so basic, so fundamental, let alone a youth. In 2016, the census reported that 27,680 young people aged 12 to 24 were homeless. There is no excuse for why that number of youth are currently experiencing homelessness. The thing that upsets me even more is how well our cities can hide these Australians. Take this statistic from the Salvation Army. For every homeless person you see on the streets, there are 13 other homeless people you don't see. The pathway to end homelessness won't be easy. It will involve more funding, more NGOs, more youth workers, and overall, more care for the tens of thousands of youth each and every night that face homelessness. But I truly believe that with these steps and more, in 20 years, no one else like me will ever have to wonder, where will I sleep tonight? Thank you, Nick, for this brilliant speech, and this is an incredibly important issue. And I agree with Nick that it starts with the care from government about this issue. We can fix this. A country like Australia has no reason to have people not only sleeping on the streets, but in unstable accommodation and without the permanent housing they need to build their lives and their future, let alone youth, as he says. More than 116,000 people are homeless in Australia, according to the 2016 census, and this number is expected to rise due to most recent events. An Albanese Labor government has already announced policies that we will do to address the housing crisis and homelessness crisis in Australia. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I call the member for Bass by virtual presence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the whole country looks to the future as we emerge from the pandemic, two recent projects in northern Tasmania are helping to cement the economic and creative future of the region. Recently, I was thrilled to officially open the first 15 kilometres of the Georgetown mountain bike trails at Mount George. I fought to secure the $4.4 million in funding needed as a candidate for the seat of Bass at the 2019 election. Design and construction of the Mount George trails, with 80 kilometres to build overall, has been undertaken by internationally renowned trail builders World Trail. And from the feedback I've received by locals and other mountain bike enthusiasts from across Tasmania, the first 15 kilometres is certainly ticking all the right boxes. Though our government has provided the funding, these trails are a collaboration between the government, the Georgetown Council and Bell Bay Aluminium. Bell Bay Aluminium, the largest employer in the municipality, continues to invest in the future of our community, and I'd like to thank them, and in particular General Manager Shona Markham, for facilitating access to the land owned by the smelter for a significant portion of the trails. The trail is just 35 minutes from Launceston, and with the world-class Derby mountain bike trails in northern Tasmania, is another fantastic addition to the region's growing reputation as a premier destination for mountain biking enthusiasts. Over in the West Tamar region, after years of work and due diligence behind the scenes, the state's first ever fermentation hub is one big step closer to getting off the ground. After securing $7.5 million through the most recent round of Building Better Regions Fund. A winner for agriculture and tourism, the hub will allow budding fermentation businesses to utilise the hub's equipment and research facilities, lowering development costs and fostering new products. The 1,899 square metre purpose-built fermentation facility will be a hub of innovation, education and tourism across a wide range of fermented food and drink industries, including kimchi, kefir and kombucha, and more traditional fermented industries such as baking and cheese making. The hub is a job generator for our region, with around 650 jobs expected to be created between now and 2030. And it will also offer training and educational opportunities in fermentation skills and hands-on experiences to tourists. I've been a big supporter of the project for many years and would like to thank Ferment Tas chairperson Kim Seagram and CEO Karina Damberg for their tireless work on the project and not giving up on an idea that has been 7 years in the making. I'd also like to thank the West Tamar Council for providing the land. Tasmania is a world leader in the production of fermented food and beverages, and I'm incredibly excited that our government's been able to support a project that will be a game changer for northern Tasmania.
I call the honourable member for Solomon by virtual presence.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Speaker. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty, which anchors the current Antarctic Treaty System. Australia a critical role in creating and sustaining this architecture. But if we want to play the same role over the next 60 years, greater investment and presence by Australia is needed. This treaty designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve, prohibits military activity, and provides that no action while the treaty is in force can enhance or diminish the legal basis of any territorial claims to the continent. Antarctica has experienced no military conflict so far, and we hope that it never will. However, the treaty preferred to defer rather than resolve the thorny issue of territorial claims, and the treaty has no enforcement mechanisms. The continent is increasingly becoming a new theatre of power politics, intimately linked to geopolitical contestation further north in the Indo-Pacific. China and Russia are bolstering their investment and military presence under the guise often of scientific research, press their influence and probe for the treaty weaknesses. This comes at a time when Australia and like-minded countries such as the US and the UK have had to scale back our Antarctic programs to prioritise COVID-19. We need to be clear about Antarctic's value to states. It is enormous. It holds massive deposits of gold, copper, lead, zinc and uranium, as well as 70% of the world's fresh water. But these resources aside, bases and ports in Antarctica also enable force projection straight into the Pacific, the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. Australia has always had a direct interest in protecting Antarctica, and Labor has a proud history in protecting Antarctic wilderness. Its claim is 42% of Antarctic territory, the largest territorial claim of any state. We formalised our claim in 1933, but it stretches all the way back to British claims from 1841, long before the Antarctic Treaty. For years, Australia has been at the forefront of Antarctic science and exploration. These conditions have brought us real influence in terms of international decision-making on Antarctica. Ongoing cuts to science and research erode the critical Australian power. So if we want Australia's Antarctic territory to continue to be the integral part of Australia that we have always claimed that it is, then we must make Antarctica a strategic priority for Australia. We cannot defend Australia's sovereignty without doing so.
Okay. I call the member for Bowman by virtual presence.
Deputy Speaker, while the member for Solomon is basically freestyling in the Antarctic Territory, there's a very important 10th Aboriginal Economic Development Forum happening in his own territory. I mean, these are key stakeholders from business and government and the non-profit sector committed to progressing Aboriginal economic development in Alice Springs starting today. And sharing of knowledge is critical. We need to look back over the last 2 decades and ask ourselves what both sides of government have achieved in Aboriginal self-determination, predominantly through economic independence. I think there are very important questions that we raised in Alice Springs starting today. I mean, what is work as we define it? How far away should it be from country where there is unquestionable connection? We need to know that Indigenous Australians are getting their share of the economic activity in their regions, and particularly that those opportunities are spread across all households fairly and evenly, rather than just being enjoyed by one or two. We need to make sure that economic opportunity is to all age groups, so not just working age healthy adults, but we shouldn't lose, for instance, those over the age of 40 or 50 as being too late to engage in the global economy. This connection to country is extremely important, and we understand the need for that connection, but it doesn't mean being trapped on country. We need to be asking questions about at what point business can actually exist in remote communities, particularly service provision that traditionally between Indigenous Australians hasn't been monetised necessarily. We know that in the mainstream, around a half of all employment is service provision. And the notion of global engagement, Indigenous Australia will have an increasing role, walking in both paths, the indigenous, traditional Indigenous path, but also the global economic one. These are vitally important, and obviously goods and services are going to be showcased in Alice Springs over the next couple of days. But the big question is, where can this all lead? What will Indigenous communities look like 10 and 20 years from now? And can we initiate a genuine socio-economic conversation that preserves the best of Indigenous Australia, but gives them a chance to do three things? Have 4 out of 5 children not vulnerable, completing and enjoying school. 4 out of 5 adults that are working age and healthy, engaged in the real economy outside of government jobs. And these important questions are ones that are well worth hearing the answers in Alice Springs. To Minister Ken Wyatt, and in particular to the Northern Territory government that's done some exceptional work both in Nhulunbuy, in East Arnhem, and of course down in the Barkly, to trial some new models. We have to admit what we've done and much of it hasn't worked. Now is the time for new ideas and to engage Indigenous Australia in making them reality.
I call the honourable member for Brand.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Unfortunately, I was unable yesterday to speak on the motion moved by the Leader of the House in relation to the murder of Sir David Amess, so I'll take this opportunity to reflect on this shocking act of violence against an elected representative to the British House of Commons. I offer my deepest sympathies to Sir David's family, his colleagues, those who knew him and all of his constituents of Southern West. Sir David is the second British MP in the last 5 years to be killed meeting with his constituents. We remember at this time Ms Jo Cox, murdered by a far-right terrorist in 2016. Sadly, Sir David was also a victim of terrorist violence. Both Ms Cox and Sir David were murdered meeting with people from their electorates. An integral part of the work of elected representatives, like all of us here in this place, is meeting with our constituents, those who may have voted for us and those who did not. Just like last week, I held mobile office stalls on the Rockingham foreshore and in Secret Harbour, followed by a very uplifting door knock through this beautiful coastal suburb. But in the back of my mind, I could not help but think of the tragic events recently in Britain. Like many here, my office has been the subject of intense harassment by a very small number of our constituents. Some people that seek to harass and intimidate MPs and their electorate office staff are clearly deeply disturbed and have been able, for whatever reason, to address their challenges. Others seem to be simply at the end of their tether from the pressures of daily life. But others simply think they are entitled to behave in any manner they wish in relation to members of Parliament and their electorate office staff. While MPs are the focus of such aggression, and I can tell you it can be frightening and deeply unsettling, we must always remember that it is the good, hard-working electorate officers that bear the brunt of most of the harassment that is dealt out by so very few of our constituents. In any consideration in this place and elsewhere of the personal security of MPs and senators, we must always consider the people who act as electorate officers and ensure that they too are kept safe. Bringing to a civil end ongoing incidents of harassment and intimidation of elected officers and those who work in them should be a clear priority. I want to make it very clear that I will not meet with people who are entirely uncivil or who harass my staff or who enter into my electorate office yelling out demands to see me and intimidating everyone present, including other constituents seeking my assistance. No one should put up with that behaviour. I will not. I will not let other constituents endure such behaviour, and I will do all that I can to ensure that my staff in my electorate office do not have to put up with it. And I know everyone here, all elected representatives, will also do all they can to make sure their staff, hard-working people representing our communities right across this nation, do not have to bear the brunt of abuse, intimidation, of harassment by so very few people in our community.
I'll call the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As the Prime Minister has said, things have changed. There is now an economic transformation in progress around the world. And Mr Deputy Speaker, regardless of what some may say, there is an economic inevitability to this transformation. We need to chart the best possible course. And building to this point has taken months and years of technological development and building of businesses, of developing trade partnerships and building new infrastructure. All of this takes time. What I'm talking about is the clean energy transformation. As John Howard said, you can't fatten a pig on market day. So too for our clean energy technology transformation. A commitment to it can't happen overnight. We need a plan that is achievable, accountable and economically viable. and that plan has been under development for years. It has resulted in the release of Australia's first low-emissions technology strategy and technology investment roadmap, with the next annual update due next week. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are making a shift to a long-term commitment to a net zero future because we know we should and we know we can. We don't believe in offering false hope with hastily made targets on the run. If we commit, Australians can be confident that we will deliver. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are doing the hard work right across the economy: energy, transport, manufacturing and agriculture. Through the CEFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and ARENA, we are investing in scalable, commercial, clean tech solutions to fuel our manufacturing and export sectors. Our 5 clean tech commercial stretch targets, which, by the way, the US have incorporated, aim to get clean hydrogen under $2 a kilo, electricity from storage for firming under $100 per megawatt hour, green steel production under $900 per tonne, and low-emissions aluminium under $2 per tonne, carbon capture and storage under $20 per tonne of CO2, and soil carbon measurement under $3 per hectare per year. We're investing in electric vehicles infrastructure with $25 million already committed. Mr Deputy Speaker, the significant amount of work from this government to build a plan for our future has reached a momentous point, not only for our environment but for our economy. And I'm proud that since day one in this place, I've been working hard each and every day inside the government for this. Even in my first speech, I said climate change is real and it affects us all. It is not just an environmental imperative to act, it's an economic one. And it's clearly now an economic inevitability. Mr Deputy Speaker, I look forward to the PM delivering the message to Glasgow. Australia is leaning into the clean tech evolution, one that I'm confident we will help deliver for the world. This is a pivotal moment in our history. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to take a moment to share with the Parliament a few of the voices of the young people in my electorate. Astrid raised with me issues of education. Imagine this, it's 2041 and Australia has one of the most equal education systems in the world. Australia is a place where a child's postcode, ethnicity or socio-economic status has no effect on their educational outcomes. We can create this future. Jordan Spencer said, "My vision for Australia is in the next 20 years is that we'll have media outlets that report the news in a reliable, balanced and honest way." Olivia Hedge, 13, raised with me, "Australia is worth protecting. We only get one chance to protect it. Our iconic species are becoming extinct because of bushfires. Our corals are dying because of increased temperatures. We can be a country that saves our future and saves our future species." Holly Sparrow, 17, raised with me, "I believe that strength exists in our differences, that rather than our similarities. As a nation, over the next 20 years, we'll face many serious challenges, and how we respond will define us. Australia is a wonderfully diverse and multicultural country. It is home to the oldest living culture in the world, and currently 3 out of 10 Australians are born overseas. This is predicted to increase." And finally, Ethan raised with me, "I think Australia will be okay if everybody gets vaccinated, everyone stays safe, and if that happens, then we can get back to our normal lives, have fun with each other, and go to friends' houses and go to parties." Ethan, many of us agree with you, and we're getting to that stage. I'm proud to say that in our part of the world, vaccination rates are up over 95% first dose and well on its way for our second dose. We've done this because we've worked together. We've believed in the science and we've supported one another. Vaccines have been available in the last period and there's no shortage of supply. Wasn't like that a while ago, but we're now there. I'd like to thank Ethan, Holly, Olivia, Jordan and Astrid for writing to me to share their experiences. It's important as we start to open up and we think of the future that we think of the young people and how we can best represent them. These students have written to me and have raised the issues of education, of diversity and honesty in media, of protecting our environment, of making sure that we respect one another and our multicultural history, and of course the pandemic and vaccines. young voices that reflect many of our own voices that we have in this place. I strongly urge the Parliament to take on board their ideas when planning policy now and into the future.
I call the honourable member for Curtin.
Deputy Speaker, type 1 diabetes can happen to anyone. Triggered by a combination of genetic and environmental factors, it cannot be prevented and it does not have a cure. Diagnosis has a profound impact on the person and their loved ones. Unlike many other medical conditions, people with type 1 diabetes manage their medication themselves, injecting or pumping insulin into their bodies every day to regulate their blood glucose levels in order to stay alive. I recently met in my electorate with Dr Debbie Smith and Ms Kari Music of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. The foundation aims to raise awareness of the challenges faced by people with type 1 diabetes. Debbie and Kari were open, candid and generous in sharing their extensive knowledge and experience with me. They expressed their appreciation of all that the federal government has done, and I note that this has been done with bipartisan support, to support those who have type 1 diabetes. This includes free access to the Continuous Glucose Monitoring Initiative for children under 21, concession status individuals and pregnant women. However, they also highlighted to me that access to life-saving and life-changing technologies that measure blood glucose and deliver insulin in response to need is inconsistent and incomplete in Australia and becomes more difficult for many juveniles after they reach adulthood. The reality is that there's a significant financial burden for people living with type 1 diabetes, their carers and the broader Australian economy. Type 1 diabetes costs the economy a total of $2.9 billion annually through a range of direct and indirect costs. Direct costs resulting from providing healthcare, formal care, income support and welfare payments are estimated at $1 billion annually. The mental well-being of people affected by type 1 diabetes comprises part of the indirect costs of the condition, which is estimated at $1.9 billion cost to the economy. This is because people with type 1 diabetes are 5 times more likely to experience depression and 1.8 times more likely to experience anxiety than the general population. 87% of people with type 1 diabetes describe their quality of life as negative. Parents and carers also present with higher rates of stress and mental illness. 2021 marks a century since the discovery of insulin, a discovery which has undoubtedly been a lifesaver for those suffering from type 1 diabetes. However, there are still significant and often unseen challenges for people with type 1 diabetes, and it is clear that ongoing support from the government and providing access to all to our life-changing diabetes technologies is the key to reducing burdens and improving well-being. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I call the honourable member for Liddell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There are so many bright young minds in my community on the Central Coast of New South Wales who are full of ideas about the future. They want to make the world a better place and they want change. But far too often their ideas are overlooked and their voices are ignored. That's why I decided to join this year's Raise Our Voice Australia campaign, to give young coasties the chance to have their voices heard in Parliament, a place where ideas can turn into action. I'm pleased to say many young people in my community submitted a speech focused on the question, what do you want Australia to look like in 20 years? They were all excellent, but there was one speech that was a clear standout, a young man named Jacob. He wrote to me, Nyata, my name is Jacob Smeaton. I am freshly 18 years old and a proud Karapmara man, a clan of the Gunditjmara whose ancestral roots reside on Lake Condah, Victoria. I've been born and nurtured on beautiful Darkin Young country in the Dobell electorate of the Central Coast, and I am raising my voice so others' voices can be heard. My vision for Australia in 20 years is a nation that truly honours the custodians that never ceded sovereignty of this land. This journey continues with a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament and true collaboration toward treaty making, truth-telling of this country's history and therefore reconciliation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This can be achieved through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, gaining bipartisan commitment, the community being educated on the statement and a referendum being held. The statement proposes a constitutional voice being enshrined, empowering Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to have a say in law and policy affecting them, as well as the establishment of the Makarrata Commission to supervise agreement, making and influence truth-telling. The Uluru Statement, being constitutionally enshrined, will help heal the wounds of this country and truly reconcile. I thank Jacob for this speech and for speaking up about what matters to him and to so many people across Australia. I would also like to thank a few other people who submitted speeches. Phoebe, who's 17, wrote to me and said, "In 20 years, arguably the near future, I hope to see empathy reenacted and treated with great emphasis in this country. I hope to see a nation that views itself as a collective society as opposed to a collection of individuals, a nation where racial and gender equality are heavily championed and climate justice is achieved." Then there's Sarah, and Sarah told me, "I would like to see equal rights being upheld for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in 20 years. The Indigenous youth suicide rate is more than double the rate of non-Indigenous youth. Indigenous Australians are more likely to be incarcerated, and our First Nations peoples are experiencing higher rates of mental health concerns. I would like to see the government change this." Then there's Carlos, and he told me, "In 20 years, I would want to see an Australia that runs sustainably. In 20 years, I would want to see an Australia that stops relying on the fossil fuel industry and the cotton industry and all other industries that hurt the planet. In 20 years, I want to see an Australia that has controllable wildfires and koalas that don't go extinct. In 20 years, I want to see an Australia that I can confidently call home."
I call the honourable member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I spoke on Monday about the importance of health breakthroughs to treat previously untreatable conditions. That we live at an age where we can turn so many conditions from death sentences into minimally intrusive chronic conditions is incredible. But not all medical breakthroughs solve problems for the first time. Some just solve old problems better. A quicker, less invasive, safer procedure is always worth looking for, and we have many companies in Bennelong who are doing just that. The treatment I would like to highlight today is called TAVI, which is the uncomplicated way of saying transcatheter aortic valve implantation. This is a new and frankly better way of treating heart valve disease. Heart valve disease is a little-known condition that we will be hearing more about in coming years. Quite simply, it's the degradation over time of your heart valves. It doesn't matter if you're fit or unhealthy. Sometimes your valves just wear out. It's entirely non-preventable and can happen to anyone, and as our society is growing older, it will inevitably happen to more and more people. As chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Heart and Stroke Foundations, I launched a report into this alongside my friend and co-chair, the member for Caldwell. The Baker Institute's report on our hidden ageing, Time to Listen to the Heart, found that more than 500,000 Australians have heart valve disease and 254,000 Australians have faulty heart valves and don't even know it. Left untreated, this can result in complications like heart failure, stroke and death. Currently, treatment is open heart surgery, one of the most dangerous surgeries around, involving the complete opening up of your chest and the obvious months of rehabilitation that follow. Every extra day spent in rehabilitation is more pain and inconvenience for patients, more delay to the system and more cost to the taxpayer. Here's where TAVI comes in. It's a procedure that allows valve replacement to occur in a minimally invasive way, a keyhole procedure involving an artificial valve made of natural animal heart tissue being implanted into the heart. It is less intrusive, cheaper, quicker, and critically requires hardly any rehabilitation. At the report's launch, we heard from a 71-year-old patient, Phil Holmes, who was back exercising and at work within days of his surgery. So what's holding up the treatment? Unfortunately, we are. Currently, it is only available for high-risk patients in private hospitals. The Medical Services Advisory Committee has now recommended TAVI for both intermediate and low-risk populations as well, but as yet the government hasn't funded it. If we did fund it, we could save time and money and give fruitful lives back to thousands of Australians with this condition. Let's just do it.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I call the member for Curtin.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
I call the member for Boone.
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.